Welcome back to the Daily Dime Friday edition, which means it's the last Daily Dime of the week before football Sunday and the nice weekend. We've had a really nice run this whole week on these pick'em sites. It's been a great week, and let's close it off strong here, Zach.
Yeah, great week on the pick'em sites. Pretty good night in the DFS streets last night as well. I don't know if you recall yesterday, right? I was sitting here, woe is me, about Victor Wembanyama and my Spurs, and talked about how the ownership in the morning run was very close between him and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and that if that kind of diverted as I expected it would, Giannis going up, Wemby going down, that I would be over the field on Wemby again, and that's what happened. That ended up working out nicely. Now, as a fan, let's see him do it against a good team this year. But yeah, good night in the DFS streets as well. So I'm ready to get into this slate. And obviously on the DFS side, a little bit of a split slate on DraftKings again. I'm not as upset about it because now it's a Friday, right? People are going out to do some stuff. I get it, DraftKings. So I'm excited to talk about the games we've got in front of us here.
Yeah, and it was cool because Wemby smashed in the exact way that we kind of expected that he would, right? Like one of our favorite picks of the day yesterday was Wemby over 4.5 stocks. He had 5 steals and 5 blocks. Just an incredible defensive performance there. And we saw that coming with the matchup. Utah was bottom of the league in both steals allowed per game and blocks allowed per game. So it was awesome to see that it came through in exactly the way we expected it to. Hopefully we can be on the ball just as well tonight. And I know you've got a few plays that you really like here on the NBA streets. I have a couple that I like quite a bit as well. And I posted an 8-pick play and 3 6-pick plays for the NFL slate this week in our Pick'em Games channel. I think what we're going to do is I'm not going to give out too many of those. I want to give our subscribers as much of a chance as possible for them to get those in before some of those lines move. So what we'll do instead is I'm going to say if we can get this show to just 25 likes, nothing crazy, just trying to build something here with the Daily Dime. If we can get the show to 25 likes, I will give out my 3 favorite NFL picks of the week. And they're picks that I kind of expect to move anyway, so I don't feel like I'd be moving the lines too much just from talking about them on here. So that's going to be the plan. If we get this show to 25 likes, I'll drop the 3 favorite NFL picks as well. In the meantime, we're going to talk some NBA picks, maybe some NBA pick 6, and then the NBA DFS slate and some injury news to watch out for and how we're going to react to it. So, Zach, let's jump in. Why don't you start us off with your favorite NBA pick of the night?
As I pull up the injury report, because that reminds me, we have a lot of injuries to talk through here tonight, and nothing really doing here on the Sacramento side of things. So this is where I actually want to begin with a place that I agree with the model here this morning, because obviously as we go through the first couple of weeks here, I've had a couple places where I differed, but this one I'm pretty much in lockstep with what the numbers say here at FTN this morning. DeMar DeRozan, more than 21.5 points. The Kings on the road taking on the Hawks here tonight. The highest implied total on the slate. Sacramento 6-point road favorites. And DeMar DeRozan, again, averaging 23 points through his first 4 appearances here in Sacramento. Over in 3 of those 4, and he's gone over the 20-point mark in all 4 games. The model has him a hair over 26 points here tonight, which I wouldn't be surprised if DeMar DeRozan ain't getting into the upper 20s. That's kind of just his career motto at this point, right? The guy is a professional scorer. But even if I think that 26.23, I think it is in the model, even if I think that's a little bit hot, there's a lot of wiggle room between that projection and where this line is at. And again, to me, I think the matchup is fantastic here as long as this game remains competitive. And I think it's to our advantage in that respect that this game is in Atlanta. 6-point spread here. Again, if this is anywhere within 12, 15 points in the fourth quarter, you'll get full run from DeMar DeRozan. And I've actually seen this number go down to 20.5 in some places, including on pick 6. So I like it even more there.
Yeah, I want to touch for a second just on some thoughts about the model itself and point out that we're getting closer to the point where all of the rates that we're looking at and the time periods that the model is looking at are all this season. And they don't have to go back to last season. But as of right now, we're still in kind of that almost like weird purgatory, if you will, where we have enough data on some players in a new role where we can say, okay, it looks like his assist rate is definitely going up. It looks like his usage might be going down, things of that nature. But then there are also a bunch of spots where we don't know if the rates this season are their new normal or if they're going to regress to what we've seen in the past. And so there are just a lot of spots where we're still in that like really difficult to project zone, but we're getting close to where the model is just going to be so dialed in day after day. So I'm with you, by the way, very much so on this DeRozan pick. And I would even say, like, I think I'm closer to just agreeing with the model's pure projection here and not just needing that wiggle room. I think this is just a really good matchup for DeRozan. And it's just, I think, an overall good spot for this Kings offense. I like this game environment quite a bit. So I love the DeRozan over 21.5 here. I think it should be 23.5 or 24.5 at minimum.
I think he'll see some Zachary Richache, who I think is going to be a very, very good defender at the NBA level, but maybe not quite yet, right? I think DeMar DeRozan should get the job done here. And I see our buddy P-Buck in the chat saying, these guys were on the road in ATL last night during Halloween, said they might have hit up the bar. Maybe a hangover spot here. We'll see, man. I don't know. DeMar DeRozan is a vet in every sense of the word. I'm not sure how crazy he's going for Halloween in Atlanta. Yeah. I think Halloween wouldn't factor into my calculus there. I think it would just be that they're on the road in Atlanta. Yeah. Maybe we look at you look at DeMar. Has he had some down games in Atlanta in the past? Is he on that Lou Will recipe when he comes through the ATL? I'm not sure. Maybe we have to ask our old buddy Tenacious D Jones to go check.
Yeah. One thing I'll say too about that, the matchup with the matchup here for DeRozan is like whenever someone like DeRozan, as you called it, a professional scorer, goes up against a younger guy, even when that young guy is a great defender, like DeRozan's going to teach him some things about how defending these NBA superstars, the clever superstars, is just a whole different animal in and of itself. So I love this DeRozan over 21.5 points. I'm going to go to an assist under for my first pick of the day. Davion Mitchell under 5.5 assists, just exploded for 11 last game. Now, there are a couple of reasons I really like this. Number one, last season, 1.9 assists per 15 minutes played. So what we've seen from him so far this season is an enormous jump in assists per minute, assist rate, all that good stuff. And to some degree, we should expect that, right? Like he's in a different role than he's ever been in. He really is kind of the primary playmaker for this offense. You could probably give that to RJ Barrett, but he's at the very least, he's being asked to do a lot more than he has in the past in terms of playmaking and all that. The problem is I don't expect this offense to be anywhere near as good at scoring as they were able to do last game against a bad defensive team in Charlotte. Lakers, not a bad defensive team. And I just generally think this Raptors team is going to struggle to score. When teams struggle to score, they struggle to convert potential assists into actual assists. So some regression on Mitchell's rates that we've seen so far, some regression on shooting from the Raptors, and I love the under 5.5 here.
Yeah, I like that call as well. And I think like if you're building for a site like Pick 6, right, where you're trying to get a little bit different with some of those picks that some people might be correlating, like I like this line is I think 3 points higher than it opened at before the last Toronto game. RJ Barrett more than 24.5 points. I'm not over the moon about that, but again, if you're looking for a last pick in there on Pick 6, I think, again, because on the surface, you maybe don't want to take the under on assists for Davion, but the over on points for RJ. But RJ also a guy that's going to try to create his own shot a good amount. And so, like, pairing that thought with what you brought up about Mitchell and his assist rate being almost twice as high as it was last season, I think if he was in this role for a large sample here with the Raptors this year, we'd probably see it go back to like low 20s where it was his rookie year in Sacramento. That still to me would mean that this assist line is a little bit hot. So specifically on Pick 6, I like that RJ Barrett play if you're pairing it with Davion Mitchell. Prize Picks, for instance, does not have the Mitchell assist prop up, which maybe some other users are hitting that as well. But that's one that I had in there on a Pick 6 entry this morning relative to Davion's assist. So I'm with you on the assist under there. I like that pick a lot.
It is still up on Underdog, so we can hit it there at the very least. For anyone who just jumped in, just a reminder, once we get this video to 25 likes, I'll give out 3 NFL picks. In the meantime, Zach, why don't you tell us your next NBA pick here tonight?
Yeah, the next one that I'm really just all over here this morning actually comes from that Raptors-Lakers game, but it's on the Lakers side, and it's Rui Hachimura over 19.5 points plus rebounds. Now, certain places you're not going to get that line. Underdog is one of them. I'm also on the 21.5 PRA line, taking a higher than on Underdog there. Rui, like we've talked about him on the Daily Dime over the first couple of weeks, right? Especially after those first two games where Coach Reddick is running these guys massive minutes. Rui averaging 34.2 minutes per game, even losing time in the blowout loss against Cleveland last game in this small sample size. 34 minutes per game, up from 26.9 last season with this Lakers team. 22.8 points plus rebounds per game so far this season. Like I've said on these Rui plays that have done well for us over the first 2 weeks, it's just a minutes and a volume play. I think this is too low. Again, in a fantastic matchup against this shorthanded Toronto team. So I'm going to continue to ride with Rui.
Yeah, I like this call. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that you like the 21.5 as well on Underdog, because I was going to say, damn, I can't use that 19.5 number over Underdog. But yeah, I'm with you once again here. I think the minutes are there. The only question I have for you is how much concern do you have about blowout here, where maybe the minutes aren't there because the starters aren't playing the fourth quarter?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to get to that point, right? We're just on the fringe of a double-digit spread here. Lakers are 9-point favorites, but I do think that the first guys that will come out, because like if you pull the entire starting unit off the floor for this Lakers team, a 16, 18-point lead might not be safe with 4 minutes to go. So, again, maybe you see a guy like LeBron come out first, right? You kind of pull guys one by one, and I think Rui is one of the guys that I feel a little bit safer in terms of his minutes, even in a blowout, right? Maybe Rui is one of the guys that's helping him get there. So, to me, again, this line is just a couple points too low, whether it's points and rebounds or you're going for the full PRA over there on Underdog. But I would also keep an eye and see if that type of prop pops up there on UD too, because I've had it on Pick 6, had it on Prize Picks here this morning, and I'm a big fan. And also, if we're talking Prize Picks, 24.5 fantasy score for Rui, give me the over.
One other thing I like to look for whenever I'm gauging blowout risk is what is the fourth quarter rotation for the player. And Hachimura usually starts the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. So I think that actually helps him because, like you said, they're much less likely to bench all of the starters at the beginning of the quarter. So maybe he plays 4 minutes of the fourth and then comes out and only loses, let's say, 4 or 5 minutes total to the blowout. And, of course, if they're blowing them out, good chance Hachimura is one of the reasons why they're doing that. So yeah, I like this one as well. We could stop there. We could make it a 3-pick play, or we could see if we can add some more. And I think that we do have some other picks that we like tonight. So let's see if we can find any others. There's one I want to talk to you about. It's actually not available on Underdog yet, although it seems like they are maybe starting to add stuff as the day goes on. As we talked about yesterday, like when we were on the show, they didn't have the Wemby 4.5 stocks. They did add that, so hopefully they'll add this one as well. But Ben Simmons over 1.5 turnovers. We know the turnover rate is not going to stay this high. It is impossibly high to start this season, but he has gone over 1.5 in all 4 games, playing 24 minutes per game pretty much. Last season averaged 1.8 turnovers in 24 minutes. And the role, like it does seem like he's being asked to do a little bit more when he's on the floor this season. So I'm not shocked to see that the turnover rate is higher. And I also just think he's kind of lost on the basketball court right now. So even though long-term, I know that the turnover rate is going to go down, I don't necessarily know that it's going down anytime soon. So what's your take here on this, this over 1.5? We have it at around 63%. We haven't projected for 2.3 turnovers.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on the over there. Again, I do think over time, right, that rate comes down a little bit. I don't think he's that loose with the juice, so to speak. Yeah. But, yeah, 1.5 does seem a little bit low for me here, especially in a game that projects to be somewhat competitive, right, taking on the Bulls here tonight. Like, you're going to see a lot of double-digit spreads with the Nets as underdogs this season. Not so here. They're home favorites tonight. So, again, I think Ben Simmons, those minutes are going to continue to be limited, but as long as he's playing in the mid-20s, I do like that take here. And I see Weisberg in the chat. So the only over I'm taking is the amount of views this video gets. Good to see you in here, Weisberg. Hope you're enjoying your NBA week. Another one that I wanted to touch on here, Alex, is another one that I'm kind of in lockstep with the model on, and it's Julius Randle. Probably the game of the night from a real hoop standpoint, Wolves and Nuggets. This one is not on the DraftKings slate, but of course you can find it everywhere. You can play the late slate on DraftKings if you must. Over 20.5 points here tonight. The model has loved him through the first 2 weeks. You and I think through the first couple of games, we're kind of tiptoeing around the Julius Randle takes. But projected for right around 24 points here by the FTN fantasy model. He's averaging 23.3 through his first 4 appearances here in Minnesota. And I think that's a welcome sight to anybody who invested in a best ball and season long, what have you, for Julius Randle, because averaged right around 24 points per game with the Knicks last season before going out with that shoulder injury. So the production, again, through the first almost 2-week sample size here, hasn't really fallen off in the points department. Now, it's not the best matchup here. This game is going to be a little bit slower. 219 implied total is the third lowest on this slate by 1.5 points. So again, this game will grind to a halt at times, right? Matching up against a guy like Aaron Gordon. Not the best individual matchup, but I still think the volume is going to be there. The efficiency has been there for Randle so far. I think he's really benefiting from playing around the guys that he is in Minnesota, especially Anthony Edwards. We talked about how many threes this team is shooting. I think it's keeping the lane a little bit more clear, especially when Randle is out there with Naz Reid and you don't have Gobert sitting down there in the dunker spot, clogging things up. So I'm riding with the model here. Julius Randle over 20.5 points tonight against the Nuggets.
Yeah, I like this call, and I think you nailed it there, that it's so much easier for him to do the things that Julius Randle likes to do with Edwards on the perimeter, and just how many threes that they are shooting as a team. The one concern that I have is he's shooting 62.5% himself from 3. On the one hand, that makes me like him even more, because I think, all right, the team wants to shoot threes. He's shooting great. Chances are they're in his ear saying, hey, Julius, let's see 6 threes per game instead of 4 from you. On the other hand, I see, oh God, shooting regression has to come at some point from 3-point land. And if it does, and the volume doesn't go up, then maybe this number's in trouble. But I'm with you. I think this is a pretty strong number. And I actually don't mind the matchup that much, just because I think Denver's going to be so locked in on Anthony Edwards, as so many teams are. So that I think he's a little bit more matchup immune than most, just because opposing teams aren't prioritizing how to slow down Julius Randle when they face this team. All right, next pick. I really like the Jalen Johnson over 9.5 that our tool is all about. We've got him at 11.7 projected rebounds. Now, if there is concern here, I think it's that he's playing absurd minutes this season, and I don't know how sustainable that is, especially right after playing Washington twice. So I think in terms of just like his rebound rate and what he's doing, I'm not surprised at all. Certainly a breakout candidate for me to start the season. Love what we're seeing. He's been at the top of the GPP scores almost every single game, and he just keeps delivering, because people are looking at his price tag like, oh man, can Jalen Johnson really be this high? But he should be, and maybe even higher. So I love everything I'm seeing. I'm liking this number as well, at 9.5. How do you feel about it?
I wouldn't be super concerned about the minutes evaporating here for Jalen Johnson, because the Hawks are one of the most shorthanded teams in the league right now, right? You've already got Bogdan Bogdanovic out at least another month. We've got DeAndre Hunter already ruled out in this game. Vit Krejci is somebody that could take minutes, right, from almost anybody in this rotation, given how shorthanded they are. So you've seen Jalen Johnson over the last 2 games, right? I believe he has played like 38 and 40 minutes there. Again, I think he's just got to be out there, right? He's going to have a ton of usage. They haven't been showing a ton of interest in playing Clint Capella big minutes. I think Onyeka Okongwu is back active. So again, I think Jalen Johnson, these minutes are going to continue. I think he's going to have opportunities for the rebounds. Not dissimilar from why I like Rui Hachimura so much with his lines everywhere. It's just a minutes play. It's a minutes play. It's a volume play. The usage that Jalen Johnson had in his 40 minutes last time out was very encouraging. So if you don't like the rebounds, I also kind of like the points. And if you look at the model likes an under on Trae Young points. So specifically for pick 6, I might go over on Jalen Johnson's points instead of his rebounds and hit the under on Trey for a little bit of that correlation.
I love that over on pick 6, especially because I was going to say the cherry on top on underdog is that the over on 9.5 rebounds for Jalen Johnson is 1.09x. So you're getting a little bit of a boost there. So play the rebounds on underdog and then do that exact thing over on pick 6 where you're going over on Jalen Johnson's points under on Trey Young's. So love that call. All right. Can we round this out and turn it into a 6-pick play? Do you have one more for us?
Let's see. So we had the Trey, we had the Jalen Johnson, or we were talking pick 6 there. In terms of a 6-pick play on underdog, let's see what I had in my entry here earlier this morning. I had your Davion Mitchell assist. I had Randall, I had DeRozan, I had Rui. I did have that Jalen Johnson over points. Now I'm going to do another entry with the rebounds. And I think this is a very slight lean to an under in the model, but I think here tonight we could see Domantas Sabonis come in under this number of 19.5 points. And again, I do like the correlation there. We're not going to get penalized by underdog if we go higher DeRozan points, lower Sabonis points there at 19.5. Sometimes you will see a little bit of penalization there, right? Yeah. Not so if you have them in this entry. So I would go Sabonis lower than 19.5 points because that's the one place that Atlanta, right? Not the best defensive front court team, but Sabonis is not a high volume shooter and they are not shorthanded in that Atlanta front court. He's still going to see Capella, Okongwu, maybe a little bit of Jalen Johnson as well. So I do like rounding out this 6-pick with the Sabonis lower than 19.5 points, as long as we've got that DeMar DeRozan in there as well.
Yeah, this is one of those spots where we're kind of talking about, looking at last season's rates and then looking at this season's rates and how do you adjust for that? And the interesting thing is when you look at Sabonis, he's gone from 19.4 points per game last season up to 24.3. He's actually shooting more this season. His threes per game has gone from 1.1 to 2.8. But then you look a little bit deeper and you say, okay, well, he shot 54.5% from threes so far this year. So it's not surprising that he's continuing to shoot as they're actually going in. Last year, 38%, the year before, 37%, the year before, 23.5% from three. So can he continue to become a better shooter? Yes, but he's going to shoot anything close to 54%? Of course not. So then you think about the fact, all right, his assists per game down from 8.2 to 5.5 this season. I don't think there's any reason to assume he's going to be less of a playmaker. He's just, to this point in 4 games, shot a little bit more and passed a little bit less. And then DeRozan comes to town. So, of course, we should expect the usage to go down, if anything, not up as it's done so far this season. So I love this call, and I love the correlation with DeRozan. So I'm very much with you here on the less than for Sabonis points, turning this into a 6-pick play for the Daily Dime instead of just our usual 3-pick.
Yeah, and if you're looking right at the game logs over the last 2 years against the Hawks, Sabonis is over this number in 2. He's under this number in 2. Again, I think, like you mentioned, the addition of DeMar DeRozan as we continue throughout the early parts of this season, I think we're going to see those shot attempts, that usage trickle downwards from where it is right now, especially that 3-point volume. I do not think that is going to be real. But again, I said that about Anthony Edwards the other night, and he went and shot another 15 or something, and now pick 6 isn't even posting his 3-point shot attempt prop. So we'll see on Sabonis, but that's what I've got in this morning in my first 6-pick with the picks that we talked about here today.
I love it. All right. I think we've talked both underdog and prize picks and pick 6 here. So we don't really need to rehash any of that. Instead, let's jump over to the DFS side of things. Do you have any plays who stand out to you as guys that you feel like you're definitely going to want in your lineup tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And we also just got our ownership and GPP scores poster for the morning before we went live. So I want to work those in here before we go fully away from prize picks, just pointing out some of those fantasy score props. I talked about Rui's. DeMar, we talked about his points, right? I also like his fantasy score over 35.5 here tonight. I think it's like a 3-point difference between what the model has right now. And then on the other side, Ricochet at 24.5 with him expected to play in the low to mid 30s in minutes here tonight. I like an over there as well. Quick spin through the injuries, right? We got Al Horford is going to sit out tonight with rest. So maybe Luke Cornett is going to pop up in some of our lineups here tonight on both sites. Brandon Miller listed questionable on the other side of that game. So if Brandon Miller comes back into the mix, maybe going to knock the projections of LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges and Nick Richards, right? Just bringing that usage back in. Big time Q tag For the Knicks, Karl Anthony Towns questionable with the wrist sprain. Please don't make me think about playing Jericho Sims or Ariel Hukporti. We'll deal with that when the news comes. Obviously, Paolo Banchero, the news coming last night, just horrible news. Torn oblique 4 to 6 weeks before he's even reevaluated. That is awful to see, but that's going to present us with a John Isaac, a Mo Wagner. I know that the GPP scores love Wendell Carter Jr., so I do want to talk about that a little bit more extensively. Zach LaVine, questionable for the Bulls. That could help your Kobe Whites, your Josh Giddys, and the light Pat Williams also now questionable for that team. Trendon Watford is back on the Brooklyn side, so that could have some ripple effects in their front court. Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly remain out, or Quickly is doubtful, so we talked a little bit about RJ Barrett, right? Shorthanded Raptors. And then Miles Turner, questionable. Andrew Nembhard, questionable in that game against the Pelicans. Where on the New Orleans side, you've still got no Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, Trey Murphy, DeJounte Murray. Q tags on Jordan Hawkins, Yves Missi, and Daniel Tice. So that is the final game of the DraftKings slate, and I feel like that is going to be the key. And hopefully we get that news shortly before 7:30 Eastern so we can make our swaps with more than one game left on the slate. But turning now to the GPP scores, I mentioned Wendell Carter, right? He's sitting at the top of the GPP scores right now, right around 15% projected ownership, and I definitely don't disagree with that. I think a lot of the attention is rightfully so going to go to John Isaac. He's the highest projected owned player on DraftKings right now at 40%. But I think at 5,400, Wendell Carter Jr. makes a lot of sense, especially if we see the ownership disparity. I'm not going to be on a 40% or more. I think he could be higher depending on what news breaks and when. But we're going to have plenty of other value here tonight. So in a matchup against Cleveland, that's tough for the entire front court. I'm really going to be paying attention to the ownership updates leading up to lock for this Magic front court, because I don't think there's a single quote-unquote lock in there. I think it's very interesting. We've got to take a second and third pass probably as the day progresses. But as much as the GPP scores like Wendell Carter Jr. here, he would be my favorite piece out of that Magic front court right now. But I'm a little hesitant. Like, why can't I just Luke Cornett against the freaking Hornets, right? Like, that's a pretty darn good matchup. So I'm not really locked into any player here, but I can tell you, Alex, in my placeholders last night on both DraftKings and FanDuel, Pacers and Pelicans, the game that is showing up a ton. I had game stacks in both of those placeholder lineups. You've got very cheap Tyrese Halliburton on the Indiana side of things, potentially no Nembhard. If there's no Nembhard, then we can start thinking about TJ McConnell, right? If there's no Turner, we're talking Siakam, we're talking Isaiah Jackson once again. And then on that Pelicans side, right, let's say all the Q tags play, you're still going to love Jose Alvarado, who's too cheap. You're going to love Jordan Hawkins, who's out there playing 30-plus minutes, getting a ton of volume. And then the spend-ups there on the Pelicans side, talk about Zion, Brandon Ingram with all the injuries, all of the guys that are sidelined here tonight. The Pels are only 4.5-point home dogs here. 232.5 implied total is tied for second highest on the slate. Pacers Pels is going to dictate a lot of how I attack this slate, especially on DraftKings where it's the last game of the night.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the number one thing that stands out to me is there's so much injury uncertainty that it's also a lot of ownership uncertainty, right? And so there are guys like Jonathan Isaac right now projects as 40% because when you look at the guys that we know that are going to play tonight and could be in a good spot, there's not a ton of value, and yet we expect there to be a ton of value based on how news breaks. So things like, Isaac could end up being 15%. And all of a sudden now that defensive upside is enough for us to want to take a chance on him. But it also might stay really high, in which case now it's like, all right, is he still going to be limited somewhat with his minutes? Is the fantasy point per minute going to be there? It's always a risk when someone's not playing a ton of minutes to just bet on fantasy points per minute. So lots of uncertainty about this slate. I think another thing that I would point out, you mentioned that New Orleans game. I think Zion is unbelievable tonight, particularly because the number one thing that I look for with Zion is what kind of size advantage does he have inside? And whether it's Miles Turner, Isaiah Jackson, Siakam, I think that he can just play bully ball on the inside in this one. So I think he's got a phenomenal spot. And then, as you said, you got that perfect bring back in Tyrese Halliburton. So I love everything about that game as well. And we've already seen a lot of success this year just trying to do these game stacks on high GPP scores, guys. And I think that makes sense, by the way, because essentially what you're saying there is each player is underowned, not just because of what he can do individually, but also because of how much this game environment could elevate and separate from the other game environments on the slate. And so when that happens, everybody hits, and it's not just that one guy with the good GPP score who comes through.
Yeah, I love the Zion call there. I think it's important to note that he's been limited to start the year, got up to 32.5 minutes last time out in the loss against the Warriors, right? Potentially lost some time to blow out there too, but with this shorthanded Pels roster that we saw drop both games out there in the Bay, 19 and 20 shot attempts for Zion, up pace matchup. I agree with you. Zion, I think 8,700 on DraftKings, still power forward center eligible. You like that a lot as a spend up here tonight. Now, I did want to touch on the Knicks. Our buddy Brewmaster in here say thoughts on Knicks centers if Towns is out. Like I mentioned earlier, I hope Towns plays. I think Towns would be an interesting play in himself, but then like having to think about min price Jericho Sims or Ariel Hukporty in my lineups just does not feel good tonight. I never like playing Jericho Sims. But in terms of the Knicks, like no matter if Towns is in or out, I think Josh Hart on both sites looks pretty great, and especially on FanDuel. I was surprised that his ownership on FanDuel is coming in lower than his DraftKings ownership this morning because I think he's priced a little bit more advantageously on FD compared to DraftKings, but I like him on both sites, and so does the model. The GPP scores are pretty solid on Josh Hart.
Yeah, I think Anunoby for the same reason. If there's no Towns, like I would almost expect some Anunoby center minutes, small ball type stuff. And we've seen like his defensive upside can be really, really good when he's in that sort of position. So he hasn't had the rebounding production that Hart has had, obviously, to this point this season, and we're never going to expect it to be anywhere close. But he's only averaging 3.5 rebounds per game. And if he's getting some center minutes, even if he's not getting center minutes, I think that's going to go up a little bit. So I think there's plenty of room for Anunoby to really pay off this 5,200 tag as well.
Yeah, and certainly room for the Knicks to go small against the Pistons, especially when Duren's off the court. Beef Stew is a little bit undersized to be a true center, so I think you could see some of that. I think that's a good shout by you. But that's about all I have from the DFS side here this morning. Like I mentioned, I'm very excited for this slate tonight because we find, again, like there's the negative side of these injuries, right? From a real hoop standpoint, your season-long teams, your best ball, but then it presents opportunities to get different on these DraftKings and FanDuel slates. So I'm looking forward to that and dealing with all the moving pieces that we're going to have here tonight.
I've got one final question for you, and it stays in this game. Whenever we have this sort of situation where there's a starting center who's missing, and now suddenly this team is going to be really undersized in the front court, and there's a good true center on the other side, people love to use that true center. So if Jalen Duren got steamed tonight, what would your thoughts be there? Because I'll tell you, I would be a little bit afraid of the matchup with OG. Anunoby did a great job against Embiid for spurts in that series last year. And I just talk about a guy who's going to box out instead of trying to go get the rebound and just take away some offensive rebound opportunities from Duren. Like I almost think it would be a matchup downgrade. Am I crazy for thinking that?
I don't think you're crazy for thinking that at all. The price is attractive in a vacuum. $6,100 for Jalen Duren is pretty darn cheap. But again, we haven't seen him really go above that 29 or 30 minute mark. And then he fouled out against your Sixers in 11 minutes the other night. So just a disaster game.
And they still won by 10. They still won by 10.
Exactly. But, I think that is an interesting thing to point out. That's something we should keep our eye on. I almost I would almost prefer Towns to be in because I think that is a better individual defensive matchup than going up against Jericho Sims.
I agree. All right, guys. I think that'll do it for the show. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back on Sunday with the NFL show, and then, of course, our resumption of all the free shows on Monday. So we will see you then. Hopefully we get a huge NFL weekend, and let's start it off with some nice hits here in the NBA streets tonight. We will catch you next time.